I have been crocheting since I was 5 years old, and over the years I see the same crochet problems coming up over and over again everywhere. And today we are looking at 3 of those and seeing what can be done about them. The first one is, and this is something that especially happens with beginner crocheters, that you notice that you are either losing or adding stitches without meaning to, so that it becomes wonky, or it grows that way, or anything that you didn't mean to. And if you are following a pattern, that it doesn't end up being what the pattern says. The reasons vary according to the stitches you are using, and I couldn't here go into all the different stitches what could be done, but let's quickly look at the most common problem that comes with single crochets. So in single crochets, when you turn, chain 1, turn, and make sure that you insert the hook in the very first stitch, because one of the most common mistakes is that people skip that, and then very easily on the next row you end up having 1 stitch less. So here and so on. For keeping the edges straight in double crochet, check out this video. And the more complicated the stitch is that you are using, the more careful you have to be. With this here lacy scarf, I ended up frogging quite a few times because I couldn't get the ends of the rows right, so that I would either do the loops in such a way that they increased or decreased. To fix this problem in general, what I suggest is that you work whatever you are working on row by row or round by round, and at the end of each row or round you always count all the stitches to make sure you have the right number of them. And if the number of stitches is not right, then undo or frog that 1 row and try to work on where the problem is. And if you are working on something fairly large, then it might be worth taking a smaller piece first and working on that to make sure that you know what causes a problem with the number of stitches. And I assure you, it is worth finding out where the problem is and fixing it, because it really makes you feel good when you can be more confident that I can do this. The second common problem is that you end up having uneven stitches and rows. So your crochet doesn't look neat and tidy and the same all around. There can be several reasons for this, but one of the most common is that the size of your crochet hook and the yarn don't go together. So for instance, you don't have enough hooks, you don't have every single size, and you have a certain yarn and you have a certain hook, but they don't go together. And especially what causes uneven stitches is that your hook is too big compared to your yarn. If you work with a very large hook and a thinner yarn, it's much harder to make it really even. Most yarns suggest the size of a hook and knitting needles, and in most cases it's worth sticking to that fairly much. You can depend, if you crochet really tight, you can take a slightly bigger hook or the other way around, but not very much. Like for instance, if you have double knitting yarn and a hook size 6, you are likely to have very big floppy stitches. And if you haven't subscribed to my channel yet, you could do that now. Another very common reason for this is that the way you are holding your hook and your yarn and your work doesn't allow the yarn to flow freely, and at the same time that you are able to tighten it the right amount, keeping the right tension in the yarn. There are so many different ways of crocheting: holding your yarn, holding your hook, holding your work, and I'm not going into that now, but whatever way you are doing it, to try to find a way where your yarn flows freely without, for instance, having to pull the yarn. You would sometimes see that people would wrap the yarn some way, or keep having to go and get more yarn with the right hand, or having to loosen the yarn by hand so that it doesn't flow freely. I'm showing here how I have the yarn both flowing and able to keep a consistent tension. Either slightly pressing the yarn with my little finger or in between 2 fingers. This varies, of course, according to the way you crochet. So find a way with your way of crocheting how the yarn can flow freely and keep the right tension. The third common problem is one that some people don't even like to hear, but what it is that you end up with the wrong size of a project, of a finished project, because you didn't swatch in the beginning. So whether you are following a pattern or you have decided, for instance, to take this specific stitch pattern to make yourself a scarf or something, in both cases, I would say that there are very few cases when you crochet something and you don't need a swatch. Only those cases where the actual size doesn't matter. For instance, for a scarf or a blanket, it may not matter exactly what size it is. Especially in most clothing and accessories, like a hat or scarf or socks, they need to be the right size. So always make a swatch first and check what size it is compared to what it should be. You can also download this free calculation guide. See the link in the description. So fortunately, there's always a way to work around these problems.